I flew to Florida without warning and found my son dying while my daughter-in-law, his wife, counted his money laughing. If you're just tuning in, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update on this story. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone, the stranger's voice cutting through the humid Chicago morning like a knife through butter. Mrs. Arnold? Your son Ryan is in critical condition at Tampa General Hospital. You need to come now. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the kitchen tiles. 43 years of raising that boy, and some nurse I'd never met was telling me he was dying? My mind raced. When had I last spoken to Ryan? 3 weeks ago, maybe 4. He'd sounded distant, tired, but I'd chalked it up to his new marriage to Victoria. What happened? I managed to whisper. Ma'am, I can't discuss details over the phone, but his condition is deteriorating rapidly. I hung up without another word. My reflection in the hallway mirror showed a 67-year-old woman whose world had just tilted off its axis. Gray streaks framed my dark face, worry lines I'd earned through decades of single motherhood now etched deeper with panic. Within 2 hours, I was on a plane to Tampa, my emergency credit card maxed out for the last-minute ticket. The flight attendant's concerned glances told me everything. I looked exactly like what I was, a mother racing toward her worst nightmare. As Florida's coastline appeared below, one thought hammered in my skull. Why hadn't Ryan called me himself? Why had I learned about my own son's condition from a stranger? The sinking feeling in my stomach whispered what my heart refused to accept. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. Tampa General's sterile corridors reeked of disinfectant and desperation. My sneakers squeaked against the polished floors as I rushed toward the ICU, my overnight bag bouncing against my hip. The fluorescent lights made everything feel surreal, like I was trapped in someone else's nightmare. Room 304, the receptionist had said, barely looking up from her computer. But when I reached Ryan's room, I froze. Through the small window, I saw my son, my strong, vibrant son, connected to more machines than I could count. His once powerful frame looked shrunken beneath the white hospital sheets, his dark skin ashen and pale. And there was Victoria. She sat in the corner chair, not holding his hand or stroking his forehead, but hunched over her phone, fingers flying across the screen. Even from the hallway, I could see the calculator app open, numbers being entered and re-entered with methodical precision. Excuse me, are you family? A nurse appeared beside me, clipboard in hand. I'm his mother, Dorothy Arnold. I just flew in from Chicago. The nurse's expression shifted, surprise flickering across her features. His mother. But the wife said she was his only family. She's been making all the medical decisions. My blood turned to ice. What kind of decisions? Well, she's been consulting with doctors about comfort care options. Given his prognosis. The words hit me like a physical blow. Comfort care. That was hospital speak for giving up, for letting someone die. I pushed past the nurse and burst through the door, my maternal instincts overriding everything else. Victoria. What the hell is going on here? Victoria's head snapped up, her phone clattering to the floor. For a split second, I saw something flash across her face. Not grief or relief that family had arrived, but pure, undiluted panic. Dorothy. I didn't expect you so soon. She scrambled to pick up her phone, but not before I caught a glimpse of the screen. Bank account numbers. Life insurance information. Dollar amounts that made my stomach churn. Didn't expect me? My son is dying and you didn't think his mother should be here. Victoria stood, smoothing down her designer dress. A dress that cost more than my monthly rent. Of course I wanted you here, but Ryan, he said he didn't want to worry you. You know how independent he's always been. Ice. Every word tasted like poison in the air between us. I moved to Ryan's bedside, taking his cold hand in mine. His breathing was shallow, labored, but when I squeezed his fingers, I felt the faintest response. What happened to him? I demanded, not taking my eyes off my son's face. Food poisoning, Victoria said quickly. It progressed to sepsis. The doctors say there's nothing more they can do. Food poisoning. My son, who'd survived gang violence, 2 tours in Afghanistan, and 20 years as a Miami police officer, taken down by food poisoning? The woman took me for a fool. I want to speak to his doctor. Now. Dorothy, please. This is already so difficult. Get the doctor. Something in my tone must have convinced her I wasn't playing games. As Victoria reluctantly left to find Dr. Murphy, I leaned close to Ryan's ear and whispered words I'd said to him as a child. "Mama's here, baby. Mama's going to fix this." His eyelids fluttered just barely, but enough to tell me he could hear me. Dr. Murphy was a thin man with kind eyes and hands that shook slightly when he spoke, the telltale sign of someone delivering bad news too often. But as he explained Ryan's condition, something didn't add up. "The toxicology reports show elevated levels of antifreeze in his system," he said quietly, glancing nervously at Victoria, who hovered nearby. "Initially, we thought it was accidental ingestion, but the levels suggest repeated exposure." Antifreeze. My mind raced back to my grandmother's stories about women who killed their husbands slowly, methodically. Ethylene glycol poisoning mimicked many conditions, was hard to detect, and by the time symptoms appeared, repeated exposure? I repeated, my voice deadly calm. Victoria shifted uncomfortably. "The doctor thinks Ryan might have been working on his car. You know how he loves that old Mustang. Probably got some on his hands, maybe in his drink." "Ryan sold that Mustang 6 months ago," I interrupted, my eyes never leaving the doctor's face. "I helped him with the paperwork." The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Murphy cleared his throat. "Mrs. Arnold, there are protocols we follow when we suspect." "Suspect what?" Victoria's voice pitched higher. "Intentional poisoning." The words hung in the air like smoke. I watched Victoria's face cycle through emotions. Shock, fear, then something calculating and cold. In that moment, I saw my daughter-in-law's true face for the first time. "That's ridiculous," she laughed, but it came out forced, brittle. "Who would want to hurt Ryan? He's the kindest man alive." "Yes. But also worth $3 million in life insurance, property, and pension benefits. I'd helped him set up his financial portfolio when he got promoted to detective." That night, while Victoria went home to shower and change, I sat vigil beside Ryan's bed. The ICU was quieter after visiting hours, with only the steady beep of machines and the soft squeak of nurses' shoes breaking the silence. "Mrs. Arnold?" A young nurse approached. Maria, according to her name tag. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but your daughter-in-law has been asking a lot of questions about insurance policies and medical procedures." My blood chilled. "What kind of questions?" "When life support would be discontinued. How long someone could survive without intervention. She even asked me to witness some papers she was signing." "Papers?" My hands clenched into fists. "Did you see what kind of papers?" Maria shook her head. I told her I couldn't witness anything without knowing what it was. "But Mrs. Arnold," she seemed disappointed when we stabilized Ryan yesterday. "Most family members would be relieved." Most family members weren't calculating how much their spouse was worth dead versus alive. After Maria left, I pulled out my phone and started making calls. First to Ryan's partner, Detective Flores. Then to Ryan's lawyer. Finally, to my nephew Jerome, who worked in insurance fraud in Atlanta. Each conversation added another piece to the puzzle. Ryan had increased his life insurance policy to $3 million just 2 months after marrying Victoria. She'd been pushing him to update his will, claiming it was responsible married couple behavior. And according to Flores, Ryan had confided that he'd been feeling sick for weeks, always after meals Victoria prepared. By dawn, I had enough circumstantial evidence to paint a picture that made my soul sick. But I needed proof, and I needed Ryan to survive long enough to give it. "Mama." The voice was barely a whisper, but it was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. Ryan's eyes were open, unfocused but alert. I gripped his hand tighter, tears streaming down my face. "Baby, I'm here. Don't try to talk, just squeeze my hand if you can hear me." His fingers pressed weakly against mine. "Ryan, I need you to listen to me carefully. Do you remember feeling sick? After eating?" Another squeeze. Was it always after Victoria cooked? This time the squeeze was stronger, more deliberate. My heart broke and raged simultaneously. My son, the decorated detective, had been slowly murdered by the woman he'd trusted with his life. The irony was crushing. He'd solved hundreds of cases but missed the one that mattered most. "The sweet tea," he whispered, his voice like sandpaper. "Always. After the sweet tea. Sweet tea. Of course. The southern staple that would perfectly mask the bitter taste of ethylene glycol. Victoria had been playing the perfect southern wife, serving him poison with a smile. Listen to me, son. We're going to get through this. But I need you to fight. Can you do that for Mama? His eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw the little boy who'd promised to always protect me, even when he was only 7 years old and barely reached my waist. I'm sorry, Mama. You have nothing to be sorry for, baby. Nothing at all. But even as I said the words, I knew we were running out of time. The monitors showed his vitals weakening, and Dr. Murphy had warned me that kidney failure was imminent. Whatever I was going to do, I had to do it fast. I left Ryan with strict instructions to the nursing staff. No one but medical personnel were allowed in his room, and absolutely nothing was to be given to him by mouth without doctor's orders. Then I drove to the house my son shared with his would-be killer. The spare key was still hidden under the fake rock by the front door. Some habits from his cop training Ryan had never broken. The house was immaculate as always. Victoria prided herself on being the perfect homemaker. I started in the kitchen, my hands trembling as I opened cabinet after cabinet. Nothing seemed out of place until I reached the garage. There, behind a stack of paint cans on the highest shelf, I found it. A half-empty bottle of automotive antifreeze, the cap loose, a funnel nearby. But it was what I found in Victoria's jewelry box that made my blood run cold. Life insurance policies highlighted and annotated. Bank statements showing significant debt I'd never known about. And a printed email from a man named Lucas Porter, discussing their future together, and waiting for the inheritance. My daughter-in-law wasn't just a murderer. She was a murderer with a boyfriend, planning to cash in on my son's death and ride into the sunset with her lover. The final piece of evidence was in the refrigerator, a pitcher of sweet tea nearly full. I carefully poured some into a mason jar I found in the cabinet, sealing it tight. This would go straight to Detective Flores. As I prepared to leave, I heard Victoria's car in the driveway. My heart hammered against my ribs as I quickly replaced everything, slipping out the back door just as she entered through the front. But I hadn't been quiet enough. Through the kitchen window, I saw her standing motionless, her head tilted like she was listening. I made it back to the hospital before Victoria, my hands shaking as I called Detective Flores and arranged to meet him in the parking lot. The sweet tea sample was now evidence, sealed and labeled, on its way to the forensics lab. Dorothy. Victoria's voice behind me made me jump. She stood in the ICU entrance, her perfect makeup slightly smudged, her designer purse clutched against her chest like armor. I went to get some air, I said carefully. Did you go anywhere else? Her eyes were sharp, calculating. Where would I go? I don't know, Tampa. But Victoria wasn't buying it. She moved closer and I caught the scent of her expensive perfume mixed with something else. Fear. You know, Dorothy, Ryan and I have been talking about his final wishes. He's very clear that he doesn't want to be a burden on anyone. He wants to go peacefully. Final wishes. The audacity of this woman talking about my son's final wishes while she'd been poisoning him for months made rage bloom in my chest like a flower of fire. Is that what he told you? I kept my voice level, but my hands were clenched so tight my nails drew blood from my palms. Yes. In fact, he signed some papers yesterday before you arrived. Advanced directives. He wants the machines turned off. Lies upon lies upon lies. Ryan had been unconscious for days before I arrived. He couldn't have signed anything. I'd like to see those papers. Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. Of course. They're with his lawyer. I'm sure you understand, as his wife, I have to honor his wishes. The word wife came out like a slap. She was reminding me that legally she had more rights than I did. That she could make decisions about my son's life while I stood by helplessly. But Victoria had made one crucial mistake. She didn't know that I'd raised a cop and cops taught their mothers how to survive. You're right, I said, my voice suddenly weary, defeated. He's your husband. I'm just his mother. Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. She'd expected more fight from me. I'm glad you understand. This is already so difficult, and having family conflict would only make it harder. I nodded, slumping my shoulders, letting her see what she wanted to see. A broken, grieving mother ready to give up. I suppose I should make arrangements to fly back to Chicago. Say my goodbyes. That might be for the best, Victoria agreed, her relief palpable. Ryan wouldn't want you to see him suffer unnecessarily. But as I turned to leave, I let a small smile play at the corners of my mouth. Victoria might have forgotten that I'd raised the best detective in Miami-Dade County, But she was about to remember. 20 minutes later, I was back with Detective Flores and 2 members of the forensics team. The sweet tea sample was already being fast-tracked through the lab, and Flores had obtained a court order to prevent any changes to Ryan's medical treatment pending investigation. Mrs. Carroll? Flores approached Victoria, who'd been sitting in the waiting room, probably calculating her next move. We need to ask you some questions about your husband's condition. The color drained from her face. Questions? What kind of questions? The kind that explain why your husband has antifreeze poisoning, and why you've been researching life insurance payouts while he fights for his life. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I don't know what you're talking about. We'll see about that. As Flores read Victoria her rights, I felt a grim satisfaction. But the victory was hollow. Ryan was still dying, and we didn't know if we'd caught the poisoning in time. The next 72 hours blurred together in a haze of medical procedures, legal paperwork, and desperate hope. Ryan's condition was critical. The antifreeze had damaged his kidneys and liver severely, and the doctors weren't sure if the damage was reversible. But my son was a fighter. Slowly, incrementally, his numbers began to improve. The dialysis machine worked overtime cleaning his blood, and experimental treatments began to show promise. Victoria, meanwhile, sat in a jail cell, her bail set at $500,000. Money she didn't have since Ryan's assets were frozen pending the investigation. Mrs. Arnold? Dr. Murphy approached me on the third day, his expression cautiously optimistic. His kidney function is showing signs of recovery. It's early, but I think he's going to make it. I collapsed into the nearest chair, every emotion I'd been holding back for days flooding out at once. Relief, rage, exhaustion, and overwhelming love for my stubborn, strong son who'd refused to give up. Can he have visitors? Family only, and only for short periods. When I entered Ryan's room, his eyes were clear for the first time since I'd arrived. He was still connected to machines, still weak but unmistakably alive and alert. "Hey, Mama," he whispered. "Hey yourself, baby. You scared me. I'm sorry. I should have seen it coming. You trusted your wife. That's not something to apologize for." Ryan closed his eyes, pain flickering across his features. Not physical pain, but the deeper hurt of betrayal. "How long?" he asked. "Months, the doctors think." He was patient, careful. Wanted it to look natural. And David. So he knew about the boyfriend. Of course he did. Once a detective, always a detective. They'll both go down for this. 6 months later, I sat in a Tampa courtroom watching my daughter-in-law's murder trial. Ryan had recovered enough to testify, though he still struggled with some kidney issues and would need medication for the rest of his life. The evidence was overwhelming. The antifreeze bottle with Victoria's fingerprints. The sweet tea testing positive for ethylene glycol. Financial records showing her massive debts and her affair with Lucas Porter, who'd promised to help her start fresh once she collected Ryan's life insurance. Most damning was the digital trail. Searches on her computer for undetectable poisons, antifreeze poisoning symptoms, and how long for life insurance to pay out after death. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said during closing arguments, "this was not a crime of passion or a moment of weakness. This was a calculated, cold-blooded attempt to murder Detective Ryan Arnold for money, carried out over months by the person he trusted most in the world." Victoria's defense attorney tried to paint her as a desperate woman overwhelmed by debt, but the jury wasn't buying it. After only 4 hours of deliberation, they returned with their verdict. Guilty of attempted murder in the first degree. The judge sentenced her to 25 years in prison. Lucas Porter, who'd pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges, received 15 years. As the bailiff led Victoria away in shackles, she turned to look at Ryan one last time. There was no remorse in her eyes, only cold calculation, as if she was already planning her next move. Ryan squeezed my hand. "It's over, Mama." But I knew better. Some wounds never fully heal, and the scar of betrayal would follow my son for the rest of his life. A year after the trial, I moved to Tampa permanently. Ryan needed family close by, and I discovered I liked the Florida sunshine better than Chicago winters. We found a small house near the beach, close enough to the hospital for his regular checkups but far enough from downtown to feel like a fresh start. Ryan had retired from the police force. The physical and emotional trauma from the poisoning had ended his career, But his pension and disability benefits meant he didn't have to worry about money. "You didn't have to give up your life in Chicago for me," he said one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Baby, you are my life. Always have been." It wasn't entirely true. I'd had friends, a job I loved, a whole existence in Chicago. But family comes first, and my son needed time to rebuild his ability to trust, to love, to believe in tomorrow. We developed routines. Morning walks on the beach. Afternoon cooking lessons where I taught him to make all the dishes he'd grown up with, ensuring he'd never have to depend on anyone else's cooking again. Evening conversations where we talked about everything except the trial, the poisoning, the betrayal. Slowly, Ryan began to laugh again. Not the easy laughter he'd had before Victoria, but something harder earned and more precious. "I've been thinking about dating again," he told me one day, his voice careful. My heart clenched, but I kept my expression neutral. "That's good, baby. You're only 38. You've got a lot of life left to live. But how do I trust again? How do I know someone won't try to kill me for my money?" It was the question that kept him up at night, I knew. The question that made him check his drink twice before taking a sip, made him flinch when women showed interest in him. "One day at a time," I told him. "And maybe next time introduce her to your mama first." 2 years later, Ryan met Sarah at a support group for crime survivors. She was a teacher who'd survived a violent assault, and she understood trauma in ways that most people couldn't. Their first date was coffee in broad daylight at a crowded cafe, with me sitting at a table across the room pretending to read a magazine while actually conducting surveillance. Ryan had insisted, and Sarah had agreed without question. She understood the need for safety, for protection, for taking things slowly. "She's good for him," I told my sister Denise during one of our weekly phone calls. "Are you sure you're not just being overprotective? Girl, after what that woman did to my son, I'm going to be protective for the rest of my natural life." But Sarah was different. She brought Ryan homemade cookies but ate them first to show they were safe. She never asked about his finances or his insurance policies. She loved him for who he was, a kind, damaged man learning to live again. 6 months after they started dating, Ryan called me from Sarah's apartment. "Mama, I asked her to marry me." My heart stopped. "And?" She said yes. "But she wants a prenup. Her idea, not mine." That's when I knew Sarah was the one. A woman who protected my son's heart and his bank account without being asked was a woman I could trust. Their wedding was small, just family and close friends, held on the beach where Ryan had learned to breathe again. As I watched him kiss his bride, I thought about how close I'd come to losing him forever. Victoria was still in prison, her appeals exhausted. Lucas Porter had been released on good behavior but had moved back to California. The nightmare was truly over. "Thank you," Ryan whispered in my ear during the father-daughter dance, a tradition we'd modified since his father had never been in the picture. "For what?" "For saving my life. For not giving up on me." As we swayed to the music, surrounded by people who truly loved my son, I whispered back the words that had carried us both through the darkest time of our lives. "Mama's here, baby. Mama's always going to be here." Some stories end with justice. Others end with love. The best ones end with both, and the unshakable knowledge that family, real family, never gives up on each other. Even when the sweet tea tastes bitter. Every now and then I catch myself wondering if I overreacted. Then I remember everything they put me through and think, nope, they had it coming. What's your take?